Christians in today's world are often confused about the simplest things in the Bible. They mess up which letter is written to who, what part of the Bible is written for whom, and to whom what commandments are given. I will illustrate one of these tonight. In John 8:1, there's a situation in which Jesus comes across an adulteress, a woman who has been caught in adultery. Let's read to see what happens. Now early in the morning he came again unto the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. They're saying, Moses said this. They say, what do you say? And that's exactly what they say. They say, but what do you say? They say, are you going to contradict Moses? And they said this, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. So Jesus is in a dilemma here. Either he confirms the law of Moses and says, yes, go ahead and stone her, and they can accuse him under Roman law of a Jew orchestrating a death penalty sentence against another. Now, Israel was under Roman occupation at the time, and it was illegal on the pain of death for Jews to commit their own sentences upon each other. So either Jesus has to violate Moses' law here, or he has to violate Roman law. But Jesus is smart. Jesus always takes the third option. Read what happens here. They said this, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw the stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up, and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No, Lord. Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world, and he who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So, this story was written in John. Now, the story in John, does it have any parallels? Matthew, Mark, Luke? No, it doesn't. It's written in John. What was John's purpose? The entire book of John is pointing towards something. It's the Godhead of Christ. If you read 1 John, it talks about God being the Word and becoming flesh. None of the other Gospels do that because John's all about God's holiness. And this was an instance here in which God was showing his power to forgive sins. That's something that only God can do, is forgive sins. The Pharisees said in Mark 2:7, when Jesus forgave someone else of their sins, they said, Why doth this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but only God? And the Pharisees weren't wrong here. They were right. Only God can forgive sins. You could only forgive someone what they owe you. And when we sin, we're not violating someone else per se. We could be violating someone else, but we're not violating all mankind. We're violating God's law. So only God can forgive that. And that's what this entire story here in John 8 is about, is God showing his power to forgive, and that Jesus was in fact God. Now a lot of Christians confuse this these days, and they claim that this story abolishes the death penalty, which is complete and utter nonsense. First of all, you have no commands given by Jesus to people. You have no commands given by Jesus to government. And what you do have is Jesus forgiving sins. And even if we learn from this to forgive others what they do to us, that does not mean that we forgive crimes, governmental penalties on criminal law. There's nothing in the Bible that suggests that. It's made up, fallacious. People pull it out of the air. Now, sins are not the same things as crimes. There's a lot of things that are sins that are not crimes, and there's a lot of things that are crimes that are not sins. And sometimes there are things that are sins and crimes, and of course there's things that are not sins or crimes. Common crimes that are also sins, you think murder, theft. Crimes that are not sins, but their criminal law, speeding for example, going 36 miles per hour and 35 mile an hour on a street, that's not a moral violation. Also, you take Soviet Russia, Christianity was illegal. It was crime to be Christian. That is not a sin to be a Christian. That was a crime, but it was not sin. Likewise, there are a lot of sins that are not crimes. In today's day and age, adultery is now legal. Killing babies in the womb is now legal. Those are sins, but not crimes. Even in the Old Testament, in God's perfect law, there were sins that were not crimes, such as lust. These are thought crimes. They have nothing to do with your actions. Criminal law punishes actions. God's law punishes sins. Now, when people violated God's law, when they sinned, they're not being judged for their sin. They're being judged for their actions when the government takes handle. They're not absolved of their sins when the government executes a murderer. That murderer is not absolved. That's just a punishment for his crime. That murderer will still be judged by God in the afterlife for his sin of murder. So God's judgment and man's judgment are two different things, and God never gives us the authority to abolish judgment of crimes. We can, however, forgive sins, and only sins to the extent that they've hurt us. We cannot forgive sins that hurt someone else. We don't have the authority for that. Only God can forgive sins. I hope this helps everyone understand the difference between sins and crimes. The two are not the same. The punishment for crimes was never abolished. There's no hint of abolishing any governmental penalties for God's moral law. And Christians who claim that, they're blasphemers who profane God and say God was wrong in the Old Testament. He was unloving and unjust. That's blasphemy, and we should avoid that.